As we close up 2020, it is important to ponder, while this has been a heck of a year for many reasons, I can't shake the feeling that the entry-level PC gaming is in a bit of a weird spot right now. A new generation of GPUs have cemented the increased component pricing, and now that AMD Ryzen CPUs are kinda becoming the standard for new PC builds, they are increasing the prices a fair bit as well. The used market continues to be a bit of a dumpster fire outside of developed countries, so what about new parts? The last time we officially saw a new Ryzen APU directly for sale was July 2019, meaning that if you try to get a CPU with integrated GPUs from AMD right now, you're a fair bit behind the technological curve, and newer APUs are only being sold to OEMs, so they only sell them to companies making full computers and not directly to the final consumer. Yes, you can find random places that resell them, but that comes with an increased price, which kinda kills the point as a budget part, right? If you forget about the integrated graphics and focus purely on CPUs, then you might remember that like a million years ago in March 2020, wow, I really did think that was last year before checking it. I feel like I have aged a couple of years since then. Anyway, back in earlier 2020, AMD introduced two tremendously good low-budget CPUs, the Ryzen 3300X and the Ryzen 3100. Both are 4-core 8-thread CPUs initially priced similarly, but the 3300X was so spectacularly good for the price that I speculated back then that it will become really scarce and or expensive, so check and check. The more modest 3100 was just barely a perfect 60 FPS option for big games, and while it continues to be somewhat available, it has uncomfortably risen in price to the point of making me wonder, what is actually out there in terms of alternatives for new CPUs? So I decided to do something I have not done in a while and checked how modern Intel is doing. Now, I know what a lot of comments are going to say. The narrative in the TechTuber hive mind is that AMD has so tremendously overcome Intel that no one should dare do a comparison. Most of it is based on a lot of important real differences, like how much AMD has improved their architecture and manufacturing while Intel is still stuck refining an existing architecture. But when you actually look a little bit closer and realize that whatever is happening on that side of YouTube, where a $300 CPU is apparently entry level, doesn't always reflect the reality you find at less than a third of that budget. So I ask myself, what is it there to be found on the other side of the river anyway? This is the i3 10100F? 10100F? How the heck am I supposed to pronounce this? A 4-core, 8-thread, 14nm 10th generation Intel CPU released earlier this year. It is by itself a re-release of an early 2020 CPU from Intel, only that they removed the integrated Intel 630 graphics, which in some markets translates to a price improvement, especially if you already have a GPU or were planning to get one anyway. I paired this with a GTX 1650, Nvidia's current, albeit a little bit disappointing entry-level GPU, which is somewhat in line with the very popular GTX 1060, a very useful GPU that if you're lucky, reaches proper affordable pricing around the world. Now, you can probably just Google this CPU name and compare it with more proper benchmark numbers, but I was interested in more specific questions. Either this guy or the Ryzen 3100 will be amazing and highly optimized esport games, and if you're aiming for consistently hundreds of FPSs, I'm not sure you will need the opinion of a channel called Low Spec Gamer. So, can it achieve at least 60 FPS on the heaviest AAA games that I know of out there? Let's start with Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Oh, Assassin's Creed. There truly is not a game that can push a cheap CPU as hard as you do. While using a config file tweak to force ultra low resolutions, the CPU bottleneck is real, and both CPUs perform very similarly. Jumping to Assassin's Creed Valhalla for a second, I originally intended to use this benchmark, but seems like Ubisoft really has made some improvements that I had not noticed to the Assassin's Creed engine in terms of CPU usage, because damn, I could not get the CPU to bottleneck the 1650. That's a heck of an improvement, which also means both CPUs did super fine in this game. So let's move on to other games that do hit the CPU. Here's Red Dead Redemption 2, and its fantastic benchmark utility on which, on lowest settings and a 0.5 resolution scale, the i3 came out on top. Anytime the FPS averages reaches triple digits, I am dangerously out of my depth. But hey, that's very impressive, and the i3 is coming out on top. Watch Dogs Legion is a new addition to my CPU benchmarks because when it came out, its CPU performance was insanely low. It has improved a lot since then, but it can still hit a CPU pretty hard. Here I am using my custom ultra low settings to make sure the CPU is the one limiting things, and I was happy to see both CPUs performing way better than I expected in the benchmark map, with the i3 just being a little bit ahead. Okay, worst case scenario, they're extremely compatible. Best case scenario, the i3 is a bit better. All in all, these two are way more similar than I expected. Now I could focus on the percentual differences and compare its price in one country and call a winner, like a lot of tech tubers seem to enjoy doing, but instead, let's talk a bit about the whole world. Because if I have learned something, it is that the Intel versus AMD availability can vary a lot around the globe. Thanks, by the way, to you, also a member of this low-spec community that helped me out with this research. Here's an interesting bit. Probably due to shortages, the Ryzen 3100 has increased in cost so much that the i3 beat it in most countries, sometimes for a pretty large margin. The countries where the Ryzen was still cheaper were still a minority. And as usual, that is not the whole story. To be as fair as possible, I also included motherboard costs, looking for the cheapest compatible motherboard in that same store, which is usually a now pretty old A320 for AMD chipsets and an H410 chipset for Intel, which is also what I bought for this video. When you factor both costs combined, Ryzen comes back on top in some countries like Brazil, where the Intel compatible motherboards that we saw were surprisingly inflated in cost. And yet, the i3 with the cheapest motherboard kinda came up on top on almost all of my test countries, and in cases like Indonesia by a pretty dramatic margin. So, since I have mentioned motherboards so much, this is a good opportunity to flesh out some of the obvious things Intel is missing out on here. One of the reasons why I have favored AMD so heavily when picking entry-level CPUs before is the power of the AM4 socket. While the new generations have muddied this dramatically, and now you have to be pretty careful when checking if a new CPU will be compatible with your old motherboard, the fact that they have stuck with the same socket for so long means that you have a significantly larger pool of CPUs to upgrade for in the near future, which is very important for stopgap CPUs like the Athlons. With Intel, every generation brings a new socket, so this i3 is limited to upgrades in the same generation. Also a worthy mention, none of the motherboards I use for this comparison support overclocking. It is generally cheaper to get an AMD motherboard that supports it. Only the Intel higher end seems to allow it, which is a bummer, but if overclocking is just not a thing you plan to do, then fair enough, but it was worth mentioning. So let's recapitulate. Due to the increased shortages across the board for Ryzen, the 3300X is almost non-existent. Athlons have increased in price, and entry-level kings like the Ryzen 3100 are way less competitive than they used to be. If you do not care about overclocking, and you're the kind of person who upgrades CPUs not that frequently, then Intel of all companies might be a good new entry-level CPU option in your country. The i3 10100F is performing comparable to the 3100, or better in very CPU-heavy games aimed at 60 FPS. Part of the cost saving comes from not having integrated graphics, so if you're looking to build a two-stage PC where you use integrated graphics for a while, this is not the option. But if you already have a dedicated GPU or are planning to get one already, then hey, if your used part market is still a dumpster fire, Intel is still competitive if buying new at the entry level. What do you know? Now I know there's going to be a lot of fights in the comments with all the people saying to just buy Xeons in AliExpress, and that is another video topic that I just do not have time for right now. How about we pick a fight over something else, like my new documentary? You have heard of old school RuneScape, right? This very easy to run MMO that has been returned to popularity due to a wave of nostalgia? Did you know that in Venezuela there are thousands of people that rely on farming gold for a living? That work on a surprisingly complex black market economy to make money, and sometimes they're so numerous that they have taken control of some of the game's regions? It is a very fascinating intersection of real-world behavior and economy with the virtual world. Why am I talking about this? Because I sent out to interview people in Venezuela that have worked as gold farmers to capture some of their stories for a documentary that I just released in Nebula. What is Nebula? It's a streaming service owned and created by a group of creators looking for a place to upload not only extended versions of our content, but original pieces that will not work in YouTube because the algorithm, we'll bury it, like my documentary and my podcast Genesis. This is the first of many original projects I have in store, and if you want to take a look at this bright future of content, you can do it for free. We partnered with CuriosityStream, the best streaming service online for documentaries and non-fiction media, to offer a bundle for the ages. If you use the link in the description to get CuriosityStream, you get Nebula for free. This is not a trial. The Nebula account is active as long as you have CuriosityStream, so you can enjoy the best, most interesting educational content out there and the best of what independent creators have to offer. So if you watch my original and learn how Bitcoin is one of the most common currencies used by gold farmers to evade limitations in Venezuela, you can then watch The Blockchain Revolution, a documentary in CuriosityStream that can help you learn how the technology at the backbone of Bitcoin works and how it could be used in many other industries. Also, they have a 41% holiday discount for a whole year, so that is the lowest I have seen for a full year of the service. This is such a ridiculous bargain, and you're actively supporting quality creators, creating a platform heaven away from a place that sometimes actively works against creators' interests. So check out the link and let me know what you thought about my Nebula original.